Shug, who was hovering around you, was now being pushed back by another
Right,
officer.
another officer was
Another
there.
bicycle officer?
Yes.
So what happens next?
What happens next is we've just got, even though the immediate threat is a little bit down, and now I see that there's other cops there, it's still just an absolute mess of a situation. I mean, we've got one guy dying, we've got 10 cars all in the middle of the intersection, middle of Las Vegas Strip, traffic blocked both directions, crowd gathering, and we just not only am I the guy there, but I'm the sergeant, so I'm the one that's supposed to do something here. I could tell when I looked at 2Pac that this was going to be something beyond first aid. I couldn't really do anything for him. His injuries were too severe. So I stayed there with him. Some of the other cops are now getting the guys that are part of his crew or part of the incident, and they're trying to round them up. And those guys are not terribly cooperative. There's no fights or anything, but it's kind of like a passive resistance where they're not doing what we ask them to do. They're not going where we want them to go. We're trying to kind of corral them so that we can get people patted down, check the cars for weapons. Never found any weapons in the cars or on anybody. And we're trying to section those people off. And another thing that you have to try to do is, because they're witnesses, they need to be kept separate so people don't get their stories together. Well, that's easier said than done. And we still didn't have, it took a while for police cars to get there, because it's it's right in the Strip, and the first guys there were on bikes. And I want to say we waited, it's my best guesstimate, 4 to 5 minutes before some cars and an ambulance got there.
So an ambulance comes fairly quickly?
4 to 5 minutes is probably my best guess.
Pretty fast.
Not too bad, yeah.
So the ambulance comes, and they grab 2Pac.
Right.
Put him in the ambulance.
Yeah, they do kind of they could see he's in bad shape, so they just kind of grab him and go. So right when they were going, I grabbed one of the cops who worked for me, and I said, go ride with those guys to the hospital. So they put Shug, and Shug is still gushing blood. He's acting fine. He's not showing any signs of injury, but he's just spurting blood out of the side of his head. So I grabbed a cop, and he grabbed another cop, and those two rode in the ambulance to the hospital.
So Shug is in the same ambulance as 2Pac?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I told them, try to get a dying declaration. I didn't think it would happen, and it didn't. He never was conscious again, but just in case they would be there, in case he did.
So now you have the rest of the entourage there. You've
Right.
got the outlaws and the bodyguard, I think Frank Alexander and so forth, and some death row people. Do you start to question these guys?
We do. Once we go through, we'll go through a couple other basic things. Like I said, make sure there's no weapons. We got to get the crime scene secure. We want to try to identify the people who's got ID. Start running the license plates, whose car is whose. Start matching things up, and then once the dust settles, sort of a thing, then you start asking questions. And at that point in an investigation, you're talking very preliminary type of questions, that come down to, for the most part, who are you and what happened? Just, very general stuff. What happened tonight? What did you see? Do you know these people? All of these type of very generalized questions. And we're just not getting any answers really from anybody. Nobody wanted to talk. And it wasn't open defiance, like, screw you. It was more, well, I didn't see anything from where I was at, and yeah, I heard a couple of shots, but that was it. So going round and round, we're from the beginning, we're getting no cooperation from anybody there.
So nobody is actually giving you the real story?
Nobody. They're not even giving us a story at all, really. We call investigators. They come down to the scene, but you're talking probably an hour, maybe more, before those guys get there. So, we're still trying to keep people separated, still trying to talk to them, still trying to get these preliminary questions out of the way, trying to match people up with the cars, and so forth.
So how long do you keep everyone out there? I mean, does anyone actually get brought into the station or anything else like that?
I don't know if they came into the station that night. They may have. This is the type of thing. It went on through the night, and eventually at some point in this thing I leave. But
Right, because you're not the investigator.
I'm not the investigator, exactly. Okay. So I take care of everything on the scene with the guys as best I can. We get them as much information as we can available, but as far as following up the next day and farther on, that's really doesn't have anything to do with me.
You believe that 2Pac was already dead by the time he arrived at the trauma center?
I think he probably had some heartbeat, but there was no consciousness. It's always hard to get the medical people to talk too much because they're bound by certain federal regulations and they're not allowed to give too much information. But I think for practical purposes, he was basically dead. I think because they are a highly skilled top-level trauma unit, they managed to keep his heart beating for a couple days, but there's really no activity there at all.
Right, because it was announced 6 days later that he died.
Right.
I think his lung got removed or something.
They did rush him into immediate surgery to do what they could do. And like you said, I think a lung was removed, and eventually it was his mother who made the call to just remove him from life support.
Oh, so he was removed from life support?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
At what point did you start to realize how big this really was and who just got killed?
You know what? It was surprisingly a long time. I did, talking to some other cops who were at the scene later, none of us realized that this was going to be that big of a deal. I know now that probably sounds ridiculous or maybe even a little bit rash, but during that time period, there were a lot of rappers and so forth that were getting murdered. There was so much of that going on, and we all remember 2Pac and Biggie because they were so famous. But for every one of those guys that got killed, there was 100 street corner house party rappers that were getting it all the time. And it was a homicide. We knew the guy was famous. I don't think really the guys that I was there with realized what they were part of either. And in time, it kind of got bigger and bigger. And I think personally, he's probably bigger now than he ever was when he was alive. Kind of like Elvis, same sort of a thing. They die and they get bigger and bigger.
Right, especially since he died so young. He was in his
He was a
mid-20s.
young guy.
Yeah.
I think he was about 26 or so.
Yeah. Even though you're not the investigator, I assume you're still keeping up on the case?
To some degree. I knew the guy. I still know the guy. The guy who was one of the main investigators, Brent Becker, strangely enough, was when I was a brand new cop, he was my training officer. And I'd always kept in touch with him, always got along with him real well, and still do. Talked to him not too long ago. And he's moved out of state, and I don't think he personally really cares to talk about it anymore. And when me and him talk, we don't talk about this. We talk about other stuff.
The biggest rapper in the world gets killed in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip, and Las Vegas PD does not know who did it.
We don't. But I'll tell you, the real reason is because we got no cooperation. Even the guy who gets shot says F you, The witnesses won't talk. Nobody wants to do anything for the police. And a lot of these, there's been criticism because we don't have an arrest of a suspect. But we didn't get any cooperation from the word go. I think Suge Knight showed up to do his interview with the police the next day or the day after. He shows up with 3 attorneys and basically has nothing to say. If anybody knew what was going on, it was probably him, because he was in the mix from the word go. I mean, he saw everything. He got shot himself. No one's going to have more information than him, and we get nothing from him. So it's hard enough to get a homicide case on, even when you have good information, and we're dealing with almost no information, as well as a drive-by shooting, which tend to leave very little in the way of evidence. I think there was some shells recovered from the scene, and of course, the slugs that were inside of 2Pac, and that's basically it. There's just not much to go on. And I know you're probably going to want to talk more about this, but the guy who is the main suspect is dead. So clearly this is not going to go anywhere further.
So at one point, a picture gets released.
Right.
Which shows 2Pac on an operating table, sliced apart.
Right.
And most people assume that this is a fake picture.
It's not a fake picture. It's a real picture, unfortunately. And it shouldn't have happened. I remember at the coroner's office there, because of that incident, that picture getting out, there were policy changes. I think some people were reprimanded and so forth. I don't know who actually took the picture. It was before we all had phone cams, so it was taken with an actual camera. But it's hard, especially if you've never seen an autopsy. In simplest terms, an autopsy is brutal. It's not for the faint of heart. And here you have a guy who's a celebrity, a famous, loved celebrity, laying on the table with a Y incision cut in his body, and the back of his head opened up, and I think it's just more than people can comprehend. So everybody says it's fake because it's just too much to take in. Well, unfortunately, it's not fake.
So essentially, after 2Pac was declared dead, the body was taken to the coroner's office.
Right.
And they sliced him open.
Yes, they do a full, any homicide victim is going to get an extensive autopsy for documentation should the case be prosecuted.
So 2Pac gets killed. There are no charges filed against whoever killed him.
Right.
So the conspiracy theories start to emerge.
There's a million of them.
There's a million of them. The biggest one was that Suge somehow had 2Pac assassinated.
I say absolutely not. Didn't happen. Two reasons. First of all, you don't have somebody killed who's sitting right next to you, because it puts you in harm's way as well, which is evidenced by the fact he's shot in the head during this shooting. He takes around to the head, and by the grace of God or luck or whatever you want to call it, the trajectory of the bullet is such that it just doesn't penetrate his skull and kill him. Second of all, is that when I was at the scene with these guys, and it was heat of the moment, you know, blood flying, people yelling, Suge clearly was very worried about 2Pac. I could see it in him. He was almost panicked as he was looking at 2Pac, and he could see that he was in seriously bad shape. He was almost panicked, worried about him. And I think, you know, in those kind of situations, acting just doesn't work. If that was acting, he's the best actor that's ever set foot on the ground, because it was clearly to me not acting. It was heat of the moment stuff going on, and I saw concern and almost panic on his face and in his voice.
Right, and this wasn't like someone with a sniper rifle from across the street,
right,
that had one bullet that hit 2Pac in the head and instantly killed him. There was bullets all over the car.
Right, close range shooting from a pistol, you know, per some of the witnesses, you know, very short range type of I mean, a matter of feet, just a couple feet away. So, and I don't know how many rounds are fired, but it was 14, 16. That's typically what a magazine holds. So that would be somebody emptying out the gun.
Emptying out the clip
right
on the car.